We will begin the webinar shortly. All right. Hello, my name is Sharon Roberson, and I am President and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. I am so excited to welcome you to our Silence No More Confronting Domestic Violence in Community of Color community conversation. Good afternoon. I am honored to be with you today for this important conversation. Black and brown women face disproportionate rates of reported intimate partner violence, yet their experiences are often overlooked or misunderstood. Today's conversation will explore the cultural, systemic, and historical barriers that make seeking safety harder and what it takes to create real change. Before I begin, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our sponsors, the Nissan Foundation, Harnage Foundation, and Alliance Bernstein, for their continued generous support of our Stand Against Injustice series. Your commitment makes it possible for us to convene these vital community conversations. I will say that the reason that the YW sponsors these conversations is that we want to invite the community to have valid discussions. We are not indicting anyone. We are not looking at blaming anyone. What we want to do is better understand the issues that are important to the mission of this organization. As we know, our mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And we are fortunate today to have a very outstanding panel of experts. I will start off by letting each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves and their role in the domestic violence space. I'll start with the Honorable Robin Kimbrough Hayes.
Well, first, I'm so grateful to be in this space to talk about this important issue. And I am Robin Kimbrough Hayes, and I'm one of the General Sessions Court judges who serves on the domestic violence judicial team. And so we hear all cases domestic violence. And I am no stranger to the YW or to this work. I've been 20 plus years in this work, starting out working with the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. So I'm happy to be here today. Thank you.
All right, Sandra Dominguez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sandra Dominguez, and I am the Vice President of our Residential and Crisis Services at the YWCA Weaver Domestic Violence Center.
All right, thank you. Ms. Terra Wiens.
Hi, everyone. My name is Terra Wiens. I'm a public health data analyst at the Violence Policy Center. My work at the Violence Policy Center is focused on understanding and working on solutions to prevent gun violence, gun morbidity, and mortality in the United States. And a part of that work is looking at how gun violence impacts intimate partner violence.
All right. And we have another panelist that may be delayed, but we'll start with you, Judge Kimbrough Hayes. Intimate partner violence touches every community, yet we see that Black and Brown women continue to face a disproportionate harm. From your perspective and experience, what do you see as key factors, cultural, systemic, or structural, that keep this disparity in place?
I think this is an issue that's been going on a long time. I remember working at the coalition, working on this very issue. I think that again, domestic violence is still taboo in many communities, and it's kind of like people people in general accept domestic violence as a social or family norm. And until we're willing to have these conversations and release these secrets that happen in the household, I think we're going to see this continue to be passed down from generation to generation. So I think it's this effort to have more education, more activities, and more honest talk about how these issues intersect culturally, how they intersect in terms of classism and sexism, and those intersections. So I think we need to really plug in and talk more to those communities. I think we need to create greater access to these resources in this community. I went to a Centoria Franklin had a Pass the Beauty walk at the Hadley Park, and I think that that's really important. I mean, she had that right in the community. It was accessible, and she had people who were from racially diverse backgrounds and economic backgrounds who were talking about these issues. And if we want to look at this globally, as we look at disparities, health disparities among African American, health disparities among African American women, I think we can parallel those issues with what we're seeing statistically with domestic violence.
And Sandra, you are boots on the ground. You work in this area. You work directly with the survivors that are at the Weaver Center here in Nashville. Tell me a little bit more about that. What, from your perspective and experience, what are some of the key forces, cultural, systemic, or structural, that lead to a disparity?
Yeah, this is such a big question, and we can just dig so deep into this. But I do want to say that I think what's keeping these disparities in place is the lack of trust in the system, but also how the system has failed the unique needs of Black and Brown women in the community and just the Black and Brown community in general. I think we have to remember that people of color have experienced violence for generations, and not just in intimate relationships, but from the very systems that are supposed to protect us. Too many times we see that people reach out for help and aren't believed. They're discriminated against. They have been criminalized for seeking help in a lot of situations, and often it becomes a re-traumatization when they try to seek that support. And I think it sends a message that the system isn't for us. And from the systemic standpoint, that mistrust is what keeps many Black and Brown women and communities trapped in cycles of violence. I think as a society, we rely a lot on law enforcement as the primary access to domestic violence services. But if you think about the relationship that, even just like from the historical context that the Black and Brown community has had with law enforcement, it may not always feel so safe to do that. And calling can cause a lot of harm. It can cause a lot of fear. And they're left wondering, where can I turn for help? And in turn, they remain in these cycles of violence.
Yes, I could understand that. A little bit different question for you, Ms. Wiens. At the Violence Policy Center, Your data shows that most Black women murdered by men are killed by someone they know, most often with a gun. What patterns stand out to you in this data, and how can it guide public health and community responses to intimate partner violence?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I sort of do want to take a quick step back before talking about intimate partner violence specifically, but talk to something that Sandra, mentioned, the disparities that Black and Brown communities experience, not only with, health outcomes, but also like violence in general. And so at the VPC, we're interested in looking at sort of homicide rates in different populations in the United States. So we know that homicide rates are higher in the Black population compared to all other races and ethnicities. We know that Black males and Black females are more likely to be killed with a gun compared to their white counterparts. So specifically digging a little bit into the data, Black females are more than 4 times as likely to die by homicide, including gun homicide, compared to white females. And so we've recently released a study, it's titled When Men Murder Women. It's an annual study that the VPC releases. And in that, we show that Black females who are killed by males are more likely to be killed with a gun compared to white females, as you just mentioned. And then according to the most recent FBI crime data that we've analyzed, in 2023, 75% of Black females who were murdered by males were killed with a gun, while 65% of white females who were murdered by males were killed with a gun. And so these percentages are too high in all populations. Of course, we recognize that guns are deadly in every population, but it's obvious that Black females experience a heightened risk of fatal gun violence. And so recognizing this, we really need to work on public health and community solutions that will better protect Black women and girls from the specific harms of gun violence.
All right. Judge Kimbrough Hayes, you have a unique experience, a unique background. You've been an advocate, a faith leader, and now a judge. How do you see the church and the court system each shaping survivors' experience? And this is the key, for better or worse.
Well, I really like talking about the intersection of faith and domestic violence. I think this is really important, especially when you see in the Black church how important the Black church is important in the community, and how important the words are, the preacher are to the community. And these churches are filled, proportionally filled with women, with Black women. And I think that this is a really big issue on how faith has an impact on how African American women perceive violence in their community. And this is why it's important that we need to have theologies that can preach against domestic violence, and to reinterpret scripture, sacred texts, so that people can understand this in a way that they do not have to live in a domestic violence situation. I've done a lot of work and conversation on this about reinterpreting scripture. And on the flip side, how scripture is used to keep women in domestic violence situations. And so with the better for worse, these traditional patriarchal understandings of submission, these patriarchal understanding of sacrifice, violent sacrifice as a method to show love, or I'm being the sacrifice. So all this, these scriptures need to be reinterpreted and preached in a way that does not keep somebody in an abusive situation. I personally, faith has been very important to me since I was little. I was ingrained in my faith and Christian community, and just going through my own personal relationship situations, listening to preachers had an impact on me and how I was interpreting circumstances that I was in. And I really, I consider myself, I went to law school. I went to divinity school and learned about womanism and feminism, theology, and all of that, and still did not understand that I was in a relationship that had a lot of power and control in it and what that was. I just didn't have the framework to understand what domestic violence was and how this was impacting me and how my faith played a role in that. We need to do more education. And I think through preaching and through the church is a big move. I know the Office of Family Safety is doing some faith-based collaborations, and I think that's important. I've been to some churches where they have domestic violence information in the bathrooms. I think that's so important. And shout out to Pastor Marble at Jefferson Street, who unapologetically preaches through this lens of that says perpetrators should be held accountable, and victims should be believed and made safe. So I think that's the kind of comfort that we need. And then you can have people coming forth to being honest. I'm really going through this in my home, but faith has been a culprit in perpetuating domestic violence in communities of faith. And until we can get a lot more education about that in the church, we're going to have people suffering in silence with their faith, and that's really huge. I remember I didn't mean to talk this much. I remember there was a woman when I was working at the coalition, and she didn't report, and because she said that she believed that God was going to be upset with her if she reported her husband. I mean, her faith was a big deal, and whether she was going to report and what she should do about this, preaching about divorce and all of these things can keep somebody trapped in a very dangerous situation. So faith is a big piece, and I don't think that we talk about it enough in the work that we do. And until we begin to talk about that elephant in the room, I think we're going to be continuously in this cycle. I'm not sure if they still exist, but the Faith Trust Institute used to do a lot of work around faith and domestic violence.
Yeah, it is very, very important issue. And I love that you're able to speak to this, because there have been so many women who I've met along this whole journey in this work who have turned away from their faith because they blame the faith for allowing them to stay in a situation.
Right,
And I
right.
think it's a misinterpretation.
Right. And that, these issues of punishment, issues of sin, issues of guilt and shame, all of that, how is that interpreted? Or how does faith become complicit in perpetrating these shame rather than liberating somebody from the shame associated with being a domestic violence victim or being a rape victim for that matter?
Yes, most definitely. Right. Sandra Dominguez, you lead one of the largest domestic violence shelters in our region. What do you see as the biggest barriers for survivors that they face when trying to access safety and support?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add on to Judge Kimbrough. I think it's so powerful that you are bringing, the church to light, and not only just, the church's influence and its role, but also the experiences of, Black women and individuals, in those spaces. I bring that up because I think a lot of the time, one of the biggest barriers is that social isolation, where we are so connected to our inner circles, our communities of faith, our communities are built on, centered around work, communities of faith, activities, that sometimes we're socially isolated from the bigger supports, that can help us access help. And so I think it's important also to understand that uh, the mainstream's way of accessing safety and support can also look differently to the type of support that Black and women actually need when accessing support. And so I think a big reason people hesitate to either call our crisis line or seek shelter is because there's a fear of either police involvement, of legal involvement, and that for some reason, if they seek help, they fear that their partner or themselves may be harmed in some way. And so for some, seeking help doesn't always look like protection, and sometimes it brings more trauma, which can be a big barrier to accessing safety. And on top of that, there's a lot of cultural shame that comes with leaving. Just similar to what Judge Kimbrough, mentioned, especially in those religious spaces, for some, it's not an option to leave. And they receive a lot of judgment for leaving because of those roles to protect their family. And so I think people also feel being misunderstood or being judged or losing that community, which, we see can be a big barrier for people seeking that safety. And of course, there's the financial impact that comes with that. I think one thing that a lot of people may not realize is that, when someone does choose to leave an abusive environment, abusive home, they're moving from 2 incomes to maybe 1 income or none. And that can place people in a very vulnerable situation. Starting over and trying to start from scratch is expensive. And a lot of the times there's not that financial support, for people to be able to make that decision. And it's a lot of weight to carry when you're already trying to survive. And so when we talk about access and safety, I think we have to meet people where they're at. We have to meet people in their language, in their community, and in a way that feels real and safe to them.
That makes a very big difference, and that's how you provide the services.
That's right.
All right, Ms. Wiens, from a research perspective, what role can the data, how can we use the data that's robust and being collected to shift policies, funding, or even cultural understanding of violence prevention? We've already talked about the guns and that gun policy, but it seems as though it's so difficult to get any sort of movement in the right direction when we know the outcomes are so negative.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Speaking about data, I think they play a really crucial role in improving our understanding of how violence affects different communities and cultures differently. And this understanding can inform policy development and, where it's most appropriate to spend money for violence prevention. It can also guide some of our evaluation work. So, if we have tried an intimate partner violence intervention in one community, did that actually work? Let's go back now and look at the data and some outcomes and say, did this help support the situation? And that sort of informs like how we can move forward with new strategies. I will say violence prevention can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really important to understand how different communities are experiencing violence differently, to develop, culturally appropriate and effective prevention strategies. One strategy that works in one population may not be as effective in another. And so we do have to collect and analyze, good quality, robust data to better understand the different risk and protective factors that can help us tailor prevention efforts to specific communities and inform the best use of resources. And, we talk a lot about risk factors. I'm coming from a public health lens. We talk a lot about risk factors in communities, but I also want to highlight that communities have really strong resiliency and protective factors. And so let's figure out how communities are resilient and really support them in those ways as well. And then the last thing that I'll just say, because, I work for the Violence Policy Center, we're really interested in preventing gun violence. So from a broader perspective, research consistently reveals the deadly role that guns play in turning domestic violence into domestic homicide. And this recognition has led to policies and laws restricting firearms possessions by certain categories of gun owners. So whether it's a felon, a misdemeanor domestic violence offender, et cetera. And then there are also, it's important to recognize heightened sales and firearm transfer criteria, and just understand, how this all plays a role in violence against women and children. And so how can we use this information to protect women and children from fatal gun violence and domestic violence?
Yeah, thank you. Judge Kimbrough Hayes, you're the people's judge, and we
saw that.
appreciate you. You've worked to make justice more accessible and compassionate. What have you learned about balancing accountability, because the domestic violence is in that criminal court category, and also healing and dealing with the cases?
This is really, I'm the newest member of the General Sessions Court team, and I'm telling you, the DV docket has been very different for me than the regular docket. So it has been truly something that I've had to learn to manage, because these cases are serious. These are, I mean, the other cases are serious, but this deals with a whole nother world and dynamic, because you are dealing with these very personal, intimate relationships. So I do try to say things. I try to do everything that I'm saying. I try to do it out of love and compassion and giving dignity to both sides of this coin, and dealing with these issues in a manner that does warrant accountability, and does make sure that victims do have a voice in this situation. What's important to me on the docket is that victims know everything that's going on in court. They know what the plea is going to be, or why the case was dismissed, or anything associated with this case. I do want victims to be present and know what's happening. That's very important to me, because I think victims need to see what's going on so they can see accountability or some type of justice being played out in their particular case. As for persons who have been accused or have pled guilty, I hope every day that I try to handle each of those persons with compassion, dignity, and understanding. I said today on the docket, when I see the scales like this, I try my best to hold them up. And this is the challenge that I'm faced with daily, is to see how to do that, and to be fair, and to look at all these issues through both lenses. And let me tell you, this has been a challenge. This has been challenging, because I do come from an advocate background. This was, I'm DV all day long, training and all of this. I had a certain philosophy that I walked with and trained with and understood with. But even though I can't be an advocate on the bench, all of that has informed me to be fair, to treat people with compassion, and to treat people with dignity, and to encourage people to do better, and at the same time making sure victims are safe, and exercising accountability. And sometimes that comes in the form of tough love. So yeah.
Have you seen a cultural difference in the courtroom? No, have you seen a cultural difference in how people approach the situation in the courtroom?
Yeah, some people don't even know that it's domestic violence. Some people don't know this behavior is domestic violence. They find themselves there because a loved one encouraged them to report, and the person on the docket doesn't even know that what they're doing is domestic violence. I find that there is just this lack of understanding that this is criminal behavior, this is power and control behavior, and this behavior is unacceptable, and you don't have to accept it. There's a lot of that going on the docket, and I think that's because of social media and other kind of things that we see in society that say that these things are okay to do. And we do live in a victim blaming culture. So I think that yeah, but I get it. I I went through my own challenging situation, and I didn't know that was domestic violence. I didn't know what that was. I do know that it was toxic to me, that it was hurting me, but I didn't really have a name for it. And that's what I see some of on the bench, and that's coming from a cultural lens too. Some people know this is domestic violence, and some people don't. And in my other world, in my other life that I was living, I wanted to have a bullhorn to tell people what domestic violence is, what behaviors are, and give everybody a power and control with. I worked as the chaplain at my Harry, and I can't tell you the number of students that came to me um, with relationship issues, and I'm thinking, wow, this person's all over this power and control wheel. And so I think it's important that I know this sounds trite about training and education, but I think we can't get enough of it. I think that's why it's funded, because people need to know. We need to go into the cracks and the crevices. Small Bible groups, or small help meet a group on a pickleball court to tell them what domestic violence is. But there's a lot of shame around this issue that people really don't want to talk about it. I think about um, my daughter was in private school. I think about one time I was on the telephone, and one of the moms called seeking help. She didn't know it was me. It was just like I was answering calls, and it was somebody going through a financially abusive situation. But I never disclosed that I knew the person, that the person, I never disclosed anything about myself. I didn't want to add further shame to this person. So I think we do need to do more conversations about that. So what I found on the docket is that some people really don't know they're in domestic situations, or what they're doing is power and control, that this is wrong. I mean, I've had people stand up there and like, I gotta testify. Let me tell you what I did. I'm like, oh no, this person just doesn't have a clue that this is violent behavior. But isn't this what we train, that perpetrators learn behavior? They keep learning, they learn it through their parents or television or whatever, and then they become perpetrators of what they've learned, but nobody has told them that it's wrong, or held them accountable. I had a situation where somebody was testifying, and I thought to myself, oh wow, this was like they were using the house to control the person access. And so those things, I'm thinking, okay, this person's on the wheel. And then it escalated to what Miss Wiens was saying, that it started becoming more violent, to the point there was a weapon present. So if you had told me domestic violence kills 25 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't even know how to define domestic violence. But it was through my work at the coalition that I was introduced to what it was, and had more understanding of my own personal experiences.
All right. Well, Ms. Dominguez, Sandy, another panelist is trying to get on. However, prior to her getting on the call, we use what is the danger assessment tool every day at the Weaver Center, and the expert and developer of that will be part of this call.
Mhm.
Could you tell us before she gets on a little bit about the use of this tool? This is general information, sort of a side to what we'll be talking about in general, because this is often, there are specific risk factors that do affect Black and brown women more than others. But
Mhm.
tell us a little bit so the audience will understand what the danger assessment tool is.
Yes, absolutely. So the danger assessment is composed of 20 questions, and its purpose is to determine how high at risk someone is in an intimate partner relationship of being murdered by their intimate partner. And the research that has been done on this is amazing. What's crazy is that um, like Judge Kimbrough was saying, often people will never look at the danger assessment, have never seen a power and control wheel. But when they're sharing their stories, it starts to, you start to see all of these similarities that start to pop up. And um, a few things that stand out with the danger assessment. First of all, I want to say that it was the language was written by survivors. So there is a question that instead of asking, have you been raped, it would ask, has sex ever been forced on you, which is really empowering. Another question, that mirrors the language of survivors instead of using the word strangulation, which is not really common to, the day-to-day language. People can relate more to choking, the word choke. And so the purpose of this tool and how we use it is to really bring education and bring light. Like it's already been mentioned before, sometimes people don't know that what they're experiencing is abuse. And not only that, but they may not see how high at danger they are if they continue to stay in these relationships. And so a lot of the questions, first of all, want to determine do you really believe that you're going to get murdered by this person? Do you share a child with this person? Do they control your daily activities? So these are all just like simple questions, but it's a very powerful assessment, and it really shines a lot of light when we share it with our participants at the shelter, because it's almost like there's an enlightenment of like, wow, I didn't realize that my score meant that I could be, that I could lose my life. And so I will say there's nothing more powerful than just that moment when someone realizes where they're at in their current situation. And the danger assessment, as well as the LAP assessment, which is the lethality assessment program, have been very beneficial tools that we use every day at the shelter.
And these tools come about really collecting important data that can be used to develop such tools, and it's very important. Ms. Wiens, talk a little bit about how the VPC develops this data research, and how and difficulties that might happen along the way, because I know that times change and reporting is a lot based on the state action. So give us a little background on that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. So, the report that I mentioned, When Men Murder Women, I can drop a link in the chat if folks are interested in sort of reading it. So that's really looking at crime incidents and these are, crime reports that are submitted by local police departments, to the FBI. And so it's looking for incidents where the victim was a female and the suspect or the suspected perpetrator was a male. And that data set provides a little bit more contextual information than we have in other data sources. So we often use mortality data from the CDC, but that doesn't have information like the victim to offender relationship that is really so important when we want to elucidate some of this information about, like, was this an intimate partner homicide perhaps versus maybe a murder within the family that was not an intimate partner relationship. And so this FBI crime data has been very important in helping us really understand what these violent incidents look like. So recently we've run into the challenge where the FBI is transitioning how they collect this crime data from states. And so they're transitioning to a new system. It's called the National Incident Based Reporting System, I believe. NIBRS is the acronym. And the FBI has been working on transitioning police departments and law enforcement agencies onto this new system for years now. Unfortunately, a few agencies are slower to adopt the new system, the new reporting system. And so that's led to gaps in the data that we're dealing with, which is too bad because, it is a really useful tool. It has really important data aspects that, like I said, are not available in other data sets. And so while we're currently using the data to sort of represent what homicides look like on the national scale, the data aren't quite there yet. They're not robust enough to really be able to speak to a more state by state level, just because of the limitations with the transition between data reporting systems. And so one thing that was really powerful in previous versions of When Men Murder Women was that we ranked states by the rate of females who were murdered by males. And that's not currently possible with the state of the data, but we're hoping to be able to get back to that in the future. Once the data are robust enough, we want to get back to ranking states to show sort of where states are in terms of the rates of females murdered by males.
Yeah, then that data point that we hope will be revived at a certain point is something that those of us who are activists and advocates on the part of survivors, we need that data because I think that it's really been something that's been informative to our legislators. They have looked at this and they really want things to be better. It's just that sometimes when the numbers, I think Tennessee has been in the top 10 for as long as I can remember. And unfortunately, we have to look at some of the reasons why. We have to look at why our society has allowed this to occur. And so it's very important for us to look at that and look at it very seriously.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll go back to you. I don't know if Judge Kimbrough has stepped away, but I'll go to you, Sandra Dominguez. We always like to leave the audience with some steps that they could take to better support survivors and any sort of prevention or any sort of insight. So within their own circles, what can they do? Especially when we're looking at their circles involving Brown and Black women, I think it's important for the community to have an understanding and to be able to support these survivors.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's different audiences here today. And so I definitely want to remind everyone that domestic violence can happen to anyone. And, on this call, we have brothers, sisters, friends, mothers, fathers, and it's really important to change the narrative of how we see and talk about domestic violence. A lot of the messages that we hear in our culture, especially, a lot of like the Black women that we work with have shared that, they shied away from seeking services because the messages that they were hearing in their culture was, you're a strong Black woman, you can't be weak, you can't seek services. In the Latino Hispanic culture, we're taught that, calladita te ves más bonita, like it's better, you look better when you're silent, and so really opening spaces for talking about domestic violence and what that looks like and naming it is so powerful. If you're an organization, I definitely, encourage you to look at your policies, look at your practices, examine your barriers. What are the gaps that people are still hitting and encountering? I think I spoke a little bit on it, but language access is so important. If you've ever been in a room where people spoke a whole different language than you did. You would feel so out of place. And just imagine, you know, how people are navigating the system with the tools that they have. And so making sure that, you know, the documents that you have, the access that you have reflects that person's language. There's wonderful trainings led by the Family Safety Center, and also our bi-monthly luncheons on on cultural humility, you know. And sometimes we have to step outside of our culture, step outside of our, you know, what we have seen and experienced to really understand the experience of others. And so that's my challenge for you, you know, to step outside of your bubble and, you know, learn and kind of dive into other people's cultures to really understand.
Right. Dr. Jacquelyn Campbell has joined. Can you hear us, Dr. Campbell?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome to the
Awesome.
call. We're honored to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very, very sorry I got double booked.
We can appreciate that. Dr. Campbell, we'll get right to you because this is an important part of this conversation. We've discussed many of the cultural barriers that Black and Brown women experience in this domestic violence space. And you spent decades studying intimate partner homicide and developed the danger assessment tool. And of course, we use that here in Nashville. And Sandy Dominguez has given an overview of how we as domestic violence advocates use a tool. What have you learned about specific risk factors for Black and Brown women, and how can this knowledge inform prevention and safety planning today?
Well, I think for Black and Brown women, what is particularly sometimes distressing and makes it more of a risk factor for them is that they are concerned, you know, if they want to stay with their partner, you know, what are the issues there and what programs are available that uh, he can, it's not always he, we know that, but that the partner can join that really will help him change his behavior. We as a system don't do very well with that. We have a lot of wonderful programs for abused women. We do a lot of safety planning about how to leave safely, etc. But we don't do a very good job in helping women stay. And oftentimes that's what women want. They, you know, and we say, oh, well, she just doesn't understand, or, you know, she doesn't fully grasp how she's being controlled, you know, these kinds of things. And, you know, I'll say that these women, Black and Brown or white, they know him far better than we ever could. And if they feel like he's capable of changing, he wants to change, and then she feels like that's a better solution for their issues and for the children, then her leaving. And particularly, she may be very concerned about using the criminal justice system because he may already have priors, you know, quote unquote, because we know that Black men are more likely to get arrested for stuff that a white man would never get arrested for, or would not have it on their record. And so she's very concerned about that, rightfully so. You know, she wants him to stop abusing her, but
Yeah.
she doesn't want him to go to jail. How does that help her and the kids? And because he's had other involvement in the criminal justice system, he may be very unemployable or only employable in some, low-level kind of job. So they have money issues. Anyway, it's very complex. And I think in the domestic violence world, we have assumed that the best thing for her is to leave. And that may not be the best thing for her. And this puts up barriers to her. I mean, in terms of contacting us, because she may think, well, I've heard of this, center that provides shelter for abused women. But, I don't want to avail myself of that because they're just going to want me to leave. And, they're going to assume that would be best for me. So I just think, when we think about these women, be they Black or brown or whatever, that we need to really listen to them and find out what they want, what they need, and believe them about their perceptions of their partner in terms of what he needs, what would be best for him, what would be best for them as a family. Women, abused women almost always come with children. And, that's what they're thinking about too, is the long-term needs and best outcomes for the kids. So I just think that what I think is we definitely need to help her find out how much risk of homicide there is. We need to do the danger assessment with her, score it with her, give her those results, and then talk to her about what that means in terms of what decisions she makes from now on. But I think we also have to listen hard and also think about what can we provide for him to help him change his behavior, to not demonize him, not to call him a perpetrator, that kind of thing. She
That's
does.
so hard. It's
I
so
know it's
hard.
hard. I know that's where we've been for 20 years. That's how we've learned to think. But, one of the things I say is human beings are complicated. And, they don't come from just one, orientation. Maybe power and control is part of what they're operating from, but it's not all of what they're operating from, and we oftentimes, we have come up through the movement thinking that's the only way he'll go to an offender intervention program if he's court mandated. And that's not true. Not if we offer interventions that don't sound punitive. I mean, there is an intervention that's been tested and shown to work to help abusers change their behavior. They actually do change their behavior. And they also get intervention for PTSD. It doesn't say, oh, you poor thing, you have PTSD, you're excused for abusing your partner. It says, you are still responsible for your behavior. Abusive behavior is not acceptable, not tolerable. However, there's some reasons why, some complicated reasons why you may do this and why you're having trouble changing. And that intervention is called Strength at Home. So I'm like, if I was an abuser, wouldn't I rather go to Strength at Home than have to go through the criminal justice system, be arrested, be court mandated to a better intervention program, And, I keep thinking if we had things like this, we could offer early on before things get really bad. When she goes to shelter or contacts the shelter in order to have a respite, you know, in order to get his attention, in order to, and she may be fully intending to go back. And, or she may change her mind and decide to go back because the kids are a mess. You know, when she goes to the shelter, you know, there's so much complexities, and human beings and human lives are so complicated. And, you know, there are even more barriers to a healthy, happy family life for Black women, you know, and so, you know, I just think we need to think a little differently about possibilities for abusers, for families. So, you know, long, complicated answer to your question.
Yeah, unique because I guess I was brought up old school.
Oh, I
You
know.
go
So
and
was
you're
I.
out
You
of
know,
there.
I've
But
been in this business as
no,
long as
I
you
agree.
have. And I'll say, you know, I knew Ellen Pence. I adored Ellen Pence. But I think if Ellen Pence were alive today and I showed her some of this new brain science, she would say, maybe we need to think a little differently about solutions, not about, you know, about the nature of the problem, the causes of the problem, and therefore solutions.
It makes sense. Well, you know, very quickly, just a follow-up to that, there are a lot of consequences. We're seeing more and more young mothers coming into shelter, especially
Yep.
young Black mothers with children, those who have had injuries. And we've done quite a bit of research in this area, and we understand there are physical and long-term health impacts of the abuse. So we can say, because we know it takes about average of 7 times before people leave, but in between, there's a lot of damage done.
Yeah. And if we think differently, you know, a little more than half of abused women eventually do leave, but the other 48% stay, you know? So, you know, we can't just ignore them either. And if she leaves and goes back, she's trying to give him a chance to do different, you know? So it's not just, you know, it takes her that long to leave for good because she hasn't been given, you know, the right avenues to leave. But we could also think about, okay, so if she could say to him after she leaves the first time, here, my friend, my partner, you need to change your behavior. And here's a program we could get you into. And if you want me to come back, you know, let's get you into it. Let's get you to change your behavior, you know, versus her going back without good supports for him, you know, to change, because that's what we want. And that's what she wants. And that would be better for the kids, right?
I don't know. We'll have to have a lot of thinking about that. I know you're the expert, but I don't know. It's going to take me a while to get there.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. But I do think we, you know, unfortunately, we're not solving the problem.
That's true. That's
You
true.
know, all the wonderful work that our shelters, our domestic violence advocates are doing, it's awesome, but it's not solving it. Our domestic violence homicides are going up, not down. So, I just feel like we need to think about adding our, more of this, adding to our approaches, adding to our solutions.
Yeah,
And
I brought myself part of the way there, that if they go back, it's better for them to go back to someone that's had some sort of counseling, but it's gonna take me a while to get there. I guess we see the side of it at the shelter. That's
yeah.
old school. You never want to put your children through that
Oh,
again.
I
So,
know, I know, I know, I know, I know. And um, like I say, I think we're doing a lot of wonderful things. We're doing a lot of great services, but I think we need to add to our thinking, that adds some more solutions. Because we're just not, it's not enough. And
people are still dying.
right, more women are dying. I mean, that's what's frightening to me. I'm like, Lord have mercy, you know. And we have, if anything, just as much domestic violence as we had 20 years ago, which makes you think, oh, these kids that are growing up in these homes, they're going on to be abusive or be abused. And how do we break into that cycle better? I mean, we've done a lot of good things, but apparently not enough, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you all. This has been very enlightening. And I'll think about all this. I think it never hurts to learn new things, because in fact, we know that the approach that we've taken a few years ago, we started working toward working with young men, and we have this program that's designed to help them understand healthy masculinity, because we knew that we had to make men a part of the equation. We weren't necessarily including those men. We were saying the good men, not necessarily abusive men, but we don't have that yet. But we
Yeah.
were inviting the good men to the table,
Yeah.
because men have to hold other men accountable. So,
Oh, absolutely. We need to work with all men, the
yeah.
abusive ones and the ones that are, and the trouble is, all this stew of, toxic masculinity stuff that's
Yes.
coming across, on the media and everything, it really scares me.
Yes.
My grandson said to me, he said, Grandma, do you think I have toxic masculinity, as if it was a disease or something? And I was like, Lord have mercy. I said, no, absolutely not. But,
Yeah.
that's part of the stew that they're,
I know.
drinking from. And, but anyway.
All right. Well, I thank all of our panelists today. This, of course, has been a wonderful conversation. We're hopeful that our community has learned some things, because we do need the support of our community in order to tackle this very vital issue. We're ending Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but domestic violence is every month of the year, and we work very hard with our community partners to offer safe space, and probably more important, the education of the issue. And that's what today's was all about, the education of the issue. So I thank you all for being here, and thank those who are listening. Thank you.
Yeah, and I thank you, Tennessee, for welcoming me into your wonderful arms of domestic violence advocacy. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you.